AEW Dynamite starts off with a Mercedes Mone, Britt Baker. They're having a little sit down. Their final sit down before All In. Starts off Mercedes, being the arrogant, cocky heel that she's playing. She ends up mentioning how Britt Baker is basically the past and that now she is the future, and that basically All In that this is going to be an easy victory. Then we get Britt Baker, and she ends up responding to Mercedes, ends up saying that before there was a CEO, there was a DMD. Then they go back and forth. Then Mercedes ends up responding back, ends up mentioning that Britt Baker was her biggest fan and that she was a fan of Mercedes and that she admired Britt Baker to get into wrestling. But she went and got a degree as a plan B, so was she really all in? I like what Mercedes ended up doing there. Then Britt Baker ends up responding back, ends up saying that she never had two plan Bs, she had two plan As. She started mentioning, the four horsewomen. She ends up saying that you was always one of the four, I was always one of one. Then she ends up saying that the one thing that you were right about was that you did inspire me and that you made it to be able you was able to run so I could be able to walk. And she ends up mentioning that how that you made it possible for me to be the foundation and to be the first of the women of the company that you're sitting in right now. This is what I think this feud has been needing. Mercedes wasn't as bad on the microphone as she has been recently as well. She still wasn't the greatest, but she wasn't bad either, so this was definitely an improvement. Then she started mentioning how she used to look up to Mercedes, but now it looks like Mercedes cares more about being paid instead of actually wrestling, and hope that she's able to get that old Mercedes back, and hopefully she can face that woman at Wembley than what we have now. Then Britt Baker gets up. It looks like they was about to brawl, but Britt ends up saying that she's not going to attack her, but she ends up attacking Camille instead. And then that's the end of this segment. This was a solid segment, solid overall. This was definitely an improvement for what they have been doing. I wish we would have got more of it too, because I feel like they would have done more stuff like this. This would have been people would have been more excited for this feud overall. But overall, this was really good. This was a good way, this was a good way to, close off before they end up facing All In. I love what they did here. Next, we get two quick segments I'm not going to talk too much about. We got a Chris Jericho segment, the Learning Tree, where basically he ends up facing some random guy. I think his name was Dynamite Kid. I know they've been featuring him on Collision a bit. He ends up having a match. Chris Jericho wins, of course. Then he ends up getting on the microphone real quick, ends up saying that he will basically destroy Hook if he was to come out. Hook ends up coming out. Hook gets in his face, but then Big Bill ends up attacking him, ends up hitting with a chokeslam, and that's the end of the segment there. Not going to speak too much on it. Let's just hope that this is the end of the Learning Tree. This is the last we see of it because I'm over it. Hopefully the match delivers, because the matches that they haven't been bad. They're not anything special, but they haven't been bad either, so I don't think the match will be bad. But hopefully Hook retains his championship, and hopefully this is the end of the Learning Tree. After this, we end up getting Toni Storm. She ended up facing Saraya in a random match that honestly shouldn't be happening, but she ended up defending her AEW World Championship. She ended up beating Saraya, of course. But after the match, she's celebrating. Then out of nowhere, you hear Mariah May. Well, not here. She ends up coming in the ring, attacking Toni Storm with the shoe. She's attacking Toni Storm with the shoe. Then she ends up, caressing Toni Storm, getting all close, and ends up hugging her, and she ends up kissing her on the forehead, and that's the end of the segment there. This was overall really good. I love what they do with her. I still don't understand why Toni Storm and Mariah May don't get TV time. Still doesn't make sense to me. Ever since Mariah May turned on Toni Storm, they literally only be having like 1 minute segments. Like, I don't understand it. Personally, there are so many things that don't deserve the amount of TV time it gets, like the Learning Tree, like the 2 matches we had. Like, there's so many things that didn't need TV time. Now, it's still been a good build overall, but I feel like they could have used more TV time, in my opinion. It makes no sense for a feud this good and that as popular as them, they don't get the TV time that they deserve, in my opinion. Now we get Will Ospreay, MJF. They're cutting a promo. I think it starts up with MJF. He ends up saying that he came back from injury early, and the reason he came back from injury early was to clean up Will Ospreay mess, and that executives from AEW and Warner Bros. Asked him to do it. Then Will Ospreay started going on a rant. And he starts going on a rant basically talking about how AEW is supposed to be the alternative, supposed to be more about wrestling than it is sports entertainment, and how we're supposed to be listening to the fans. Then he ends up saying that he is the one that's bringing back that old feel of AEW being the alternative, being more about the wrestling and the story and being more sports entertainment. Then he ends up saying that the reason why Tony Khan signed him was because you weren't doing your job. He ends up saying that he had to act. Tony Khan ends up asking him that he needs to put on banger matches because his world champion at the time, MJF, couldn't do it. He ends up mentioning, his whole MJF and Adam Cole storyline, mentioning how he was more of an entertainer than he was a wrestler and that he had to clean up his mess. Then MJF starts going on a little tangent. He starts doing, his all-American gimmick, starts talking about, being the cocky, arrogant heel he is, starts, going off how Will Ospreay is a nobody, how he has to go the extra mile to win the fans over, etc. Then he ends up mentioning that the only way Will Ospreay would ever beat him is if he used the Tiger Driver, but Will Ospreay is not man enough to ever use that move. Then he starts going off on how Will Ospreay is not the best in the world and that he never has been and that he's the best. Then Will Ospreay starts going, deeper into his bag. He starts going off. He starts mentioning how if you ask anybody of any continent, any state, any country, that they're going to tell you that he's the best. He starts naming each country, each state, etc., etc. Keeps mentioning that they will all say that he's the best. Then he ends up saying that you hate me because it took you 4 years to get the fans over with you, while I only took 4 beats to my music to get them to love me. That was a very dope line. Now, I'm not going to say I know if that's true or not, but that was still a dope line nonetheless, if that's true. You guys let me know if that's true. Then he ends up saying that they used to love you, but now they love me. MJF kind of, ends up exposing himself a bit. He ends up exposing his jealousy a bit. He ends up just randomly yelling out, ends up saying that they loved me before you came and you ruined that. Then he ends up, calming himself down because he kind of went on like a little tantrum a bit. He calms himself down and then he starts mentioning Will Ospreay's family. He starts mentioning how Will Ospreay is a father, but he's a stepfather. He took care of a father that took care of a son that wasn't his, right? Then he ends up mentioning his wife and ends up saying that he had a conversation with his wife. Then he gets to his ear and ends up saying that I have a feeling that the next child that your wife ends up bearing won't be yours either, which I don't know why I laughed when I heard that, but this feud has been great. But then Will Ospreay ends up going to Tony Schiavone because he was talking to Tony Khan, ends up saying that how much would a fine cost me if I attack him. He ends up saying the price. Will Ospreay didn't care, and he ends up attacking MJF. They constantly brawl. Security has to break them apart. They're going back and forth. Then security ends up pulling Will Ospreay away, which allows MJF to get the upper hand, and he ends up hitting him with the diamond ring. MJF takes care of all the security. Then he starts bashing Will Ospreay's head over and over again with the diamond ring, starts making him bleed. Then he's about to hit the Tiger Driver. He was about to hit the Tiger Driver, but security ends up breaking him up, ends up, preventing him from doing that, and that's the end of the segment. Love what they were doing here. Really love what they're doing here. Both wrestlers cooked on the microphone. I feel like Will Ospreay probably got the better of him to a degree, but overall, this was a really good segment. I love what they did here. We get a quick segment after this, after Will Ospreay was left bloody in the ring. Got a quick segment with Will Ospreay and Bryan Danielson. Bryan Danielson walks up to Will Ospreay, and he ends up telling him to do it. He's like, bro, do it. He ends up telling him to look. He didn't say specifically what move, but we know what move he's alluding to. He's alluding to the Tiger Driver, that he needs to pull the trigger and use the Tiger Driver. So it's very interesting, and it'll be very interesting to see if he actually ends up going through and ends up pulling the move. Then we get to the main event. Swerve comes out. He gets on the microphone. He ends up saying that how he's basically going to be the one to retire Bryan Danielson, but he ends up saying that he feels disrespected by Bryan Danielson. He ends up saying how Bryan Danielson going on interviews, constantly saying that he's ready to retire, he's ready to give it up, and that you're trying to take that moment away from me. You're taking that moment away from me, that I'm going to be the reason why you retired, not because you chose to retire. Then he ends up saying that after Wembley, that he's going to make sure that he's the reason that he can't even wrestle, and that whenever Bryan Danielson gets that little itch, get that feeling that he could come back and be the man again, he will always be there to prevent that from happening. Then Bryan Danielson ends up coming out. He immediately takes out Swerve. He ends up cutting a deep, passionate promo, but the promo was basically that he's the best in the world, that Swerve knows that he can lose his AEW World Championship, and that he's going to do whatever it takes to win at All In. Then the crowd goes crazy. You get a bunch of yes chants, and that's how we end Dynamite. This was an overall solid go. This was a good go home show. I enjoyed tonight's episode of Dynamite. I'm very excited for All In. You guys let me know your opinions down below. I'm soon going to be making my AEW All In predictions later on tonight. So you guys let me know what your guys' thoughts and opinions below. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. But yeah, that's it.